First passage, 1 Thessalonians 1:10. But let me back up and read verse 9 so we can see the context. Paul says, "For they themselves report concerning us the kind of reception we had among you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God." Paul is just heaping the praises of the Gentiles who he's writing to, predominantly in his letters, right? Who are turning to God, the community, the faith communities, which of course, remember what we learned in Romans 14, I believe does include unbelieving Jews who are also turning to faith in Messiah. But notice he says that the last thing, twice in this verse, he says, you turn to God from idols. It's to serve the living and true and living God. So God, or theos, or theon, or theo, or something to that effect, whatever Greek, is used twice in this passage. That being the subject, right, the context, pushes us right into verse 10, and Paul says, and to wait for his, right, who's the his? The his referring to God, his son from heaven, whom he, who's the he? God raised from the dead. Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. So from a context perspective, it is unquestionable that Paul is talking about God is the one who raised Jesus from the dead. That's what Paul says in verse 10, whom he raised from the dead. Who's the he? God. God, as determined by the context in the previous verse. That's why I read verse 9 with verse 10. We can even look at the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible. And of course they're going to champion this idea as monotheists, as Unitarians, as Arians who believe that Jesus is not very God. They're going to champion this idea that God is the one who raised Jesus from the dead. In fact, what they say in their version is, for they themselves keep reporting about our first contact with you and how you turned to God from your idols to slave for a living and true God, and to wait, verse 10, for his son from the heavens, whom he raised from the dead, namely Jesus. So notice their translation, Jehovah's Witnesses, jw.org, is going to be nearly identical to any other standard Christian version that speaks of God raising Jesus from the dead, because that's the position that Jehovah's Witnesses is going to take, the exclusive position that Jesus was raised by God. However, let's keep reading. Look at John 2, starting in verse 19. But to catch the context, let's read 18, 19, and 20, and 21. John writes, "So the Jews said to him," speaking to Jesus, "What sign do you show us for doing these things?" Verse 19, Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Verse 20, the Jews then said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" And then verse 21, but he was speaking about the temple of his body. So, from context, we have this discussion between Yeshua and some of the religious Jews of his day, or maybe not even religious, but the point being, Yeshua, speaking of his body, says that I will raise it up. Now, let's look at the Jehovah's Witnesses' perspective and see what they have to say. If Yeshua says that he will raise it up, this sounds unmistakably like Yeshua is going to be the one who's responsible for resurrection, contrary to what Paul taught that God raised him. How do cults such as the Jehovah's Witness get around this passages like this? Well, let's turn to their version and read it. Starting again at verse 18 and reading verse 18, 19, 20, and 21. They have to say, "Therefore, in response, the Jews said to him, 'What sign can you show us, since you are doing these things?' Verse 19, Jesus replied to them, 'Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.'" Wow, sounds like the same rendering, right? They didn't change anything. But let's keep reading. Wait a minute. Don't jump too quick. Verse 20, the Jews then said, "This temple was built in 46 years, and you'll raise it up in 3 days." Verse 21, but he was talking about the temple of his body. Now, at a surface level reading, it sounds like they're saying the exact same thing that your standard Christian version was saying. Thus, you would think that they must also believe that Jesus raised himself as opposed to God raising himself, right? How do they get out of this? How do they wiggle out of this one?